András Bozsik of Lyme Diagnostics. Welcome to the Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, we're really blessed to have you, and I don't. You may be our first Hungarian guest. I think it's pretty exciting that we have. If you're not a first Hungarian, the first one that I remember. So thank you for joining us from Hungary and doing all the great work that you're doing there. And I apologize in advance for butchering your name, or even maybe even butchering where you are. So first of all, why don't you share with us where are you physically right now?
I'm physically just north of Budapest, Hungary. But I'm not the first, actually not the first Hungarian, but probably the first one from Hungary, because you had an interview with Eva Shapi,
That's
who's a
right.
great friend of ours.
Yes, and I'm sure Matt will be really angry with me for messing that up because we love Dr. Shoppy, although she is actually in Connecticut, right across the Long Island Sound from us. So I apologize for Dr. Shoppy for not recalling that she was our first Hungarian. So thank you for being our second Hungarian, and certainly the first person we've interviewed from Hungary. I think Matt will correct me if I'm wrong about that. So let's um. Let's first talk about your company, Lyme Diagnostics. What is your relationship with Lyme Diagnostics? I understand it's a family business. So why don't you share with our listeners a little about your company and how it's a family business?
Yeah, well, my father started actually testing as the head of a laboratory, the central laboratory for serology in Hungary, and he was actually researching syphilis. And when the first Lyme disease patients were identified in Hungary, then the samples were sent to him, asking him to do something. So that happened in 1984, 85. And then he actually realized that however much he wants to try make serology work, he couldn't. So he got like a big discrepancy, like a 70% discrepancy between the patients who had the symptoms of Lyme disease and the serology the best serology that he could make at that time. Of course, now the methods have improved. But then he decided that since microscopy is the number one testing in syphilis, even since then, that's the go-to method for more than 100 years. Therefore, he was trying to use microscopy to make up for the gap. And what he did, it was like, it was very clear that Borrelia are more scarce from the blood than, let's say, the causative agent of syphilis, from the different kind of bodily excretions and stuff, So it's not so easy just to take a drop of blood and investigate it under the microscope. But then he realized if he takes more blood and he concentrates it, then he can have a very good, reliable method. So that's what he did, and he, like later on, we are going to talk more about that, how he corrected the issues that are prevalent with microscopy of blood. And then he started this method, and even until he went to retirement, he was using this method. And as of 2015, I actually set up a family company to capitalize on this method that he invented. By that time, it was actually necessary because more and more people were asking for this method because they heard about it and they wanted to have it. So that's how we established the company. Then we received an investment from the European Union, and then we were able to do a clinical testing for the diagnostic method in Europe, and then we were able to get it registered as a medical device. So basically,
Okay.
my company is using the methods that my father has developed.
So you did share with us that it's a family business, and my understanding is it's multi-generational. So it was a method that your dad had discovered from I guess because he was researching spirochetal illnesses. There was a belief that his expertise in doing the work with syphilis would bleed over or lend over to doing research on another spirochetal disease. But your dad pretty quickly saw that there were some differences, at least some diagnostic differences between the first disease that he was studying and now this second disease he was studying, and he came up with some thoughts and ultimately tested some vehicles to overcome the challenges, the diagnostic challenges with Lyme disease that were not there with syphilis. So let's bookmark that for a moment. Matt and I are going to want to explore that with a little more detail, but I'd like to get some more background with you. So you said you started a family business, and my understanding is your son is also a member of the company. So tell us a little bit about that. What is it like to work? Take your father's work, move it forward into a business, and then have the blessing to work with your son.
Yeah, well, it's a great feeling, first of all, to get, I inherited the name from my father, who inherited it from my grandfather. So my second name, second like middle initials is Pal. So my grandfather was Pal, my father was Pal, or is Pal, and I am Pal as well. So that's like my grandfather was a very good businessman. So, and my father is completely a scientist. He's a very scientific person, but he's not a businessman. And I was like going to be a researcher as well because I grew up basically in his lab. Because when I was ill, when there was holidays, we often were taken by my father as kids. We were taken to the lab and we would spend our time there and just get the smell of the laboratory into our you know into our body and that kind of inspired me. So both of my brothers are actually doctors and I became a biophysicist. And when I returned to my father's lab, I had some dreams about how we could improve his technology. And that dream came like, in 1995, and we were able to execute it because of technology not being available. We were able to execute it from, let's say, 2018. So, uh, a long time after. So basically, yeah, it was great that I inherited the scientific part from my father, and also that I inherited this kind of business tract from my grandfather. And my son is helping me with business, so he's coming with me for business trips. He's helping me with the accounting and such. So it's really my eldest son. He's now part of the business, and he's going to inherit it, at least my part of the business.
So talk to us about your background. What's your educational background? You did share with us that you had a strong scientific, I guess, cultural experience, so social experience. Your dad would bring you to the lab. I mean, it's that's kind of a foreign experience for me. My father was never bringing me to a laboratory. It sounded very geeky to me the way you were describing it, but. Let's talk more about your background. After you received this inspiration from your childhood experiences with your dad, where'd you go to school, and what was your vision that you were pursuing for how you would serve the community when you were going to school?
Yeah, well, I always liked physics and biology, although I was also good at maths. So actually, this was I inherited this desire for biology and physics from my family. So both my father and my mother were doctors, so I guess. And I didn't become a doctor because I felt that I couldn't sit long enough, in the chair to learn all the stuff that you need to learn for becoming a good doctor, and I didn't want to become a bad doctor, so I became like um, a crazy scientist in the beginning. I wanted to become a teacher of physics, and then I specialized in biophysics, and then I learned that this is the stuff for me. But for the first 12 years of my career, I was into marketing. So a completely different topic. They told me that my physics brain is very good for marketing, so Procter and Gamble hired me, and then large multinationals hired me further. So I spent a lot of time in learning this business acumen, and then I went into doing a lot of different startups. And then it turned out that both my scientific and my business experience was coming in handy when I started our family business, knowing how to and when to start a business and how to manage it, and how to manage that you don't go bankrupt in the first few years when you are really lacking the capital and really lacking the experience. So I think we survived that with the help of my partners, who are now actually also owners of the company. So I'm very grateful for them. And to pick up the scientific trait, of course, I'm the development manager of my company's technologies. That means that I'm like defining which directions to take, and I give the visions to the people who do the development. And I think that they are doing a great job because they understand what we need, and they are world-class scientists. We have software people, we have AI people because we are using a lot of AI and picture recognition. So I came back to the scientific business as well. And to finish it off, I started my PhD 3 years ago, and I'm just about to finish it and get
Congratulations.
the PhD, the DR, which is in Hungary, is the doctor's uh, degree. I'm just gonna finish it this year, I
All
hope.
right. Well, congratulations. So another doctor in the family, not the same kind of doctor your parents were, but still another doctor in the family. So
Another
congratulations.
medical, yeah. But I chose the topic of Borrelia. And, because Borrelia burgdorferi was not the first Borrelia that was identified, basically the identification came from birds because they have a very special Borrelia anserina, which is a specific Borrelia for birds, which is being spread by soft ticks, and they can kill quite a lot of birds, actually, wild birds, and also, um, you know, chicken and stuff like that. So that is spread by soft ticks, and it belongs to the recurrent fever type of Borrelia. So that was easier to discover in the blood of the chicken who actually dead and were dead and died because of the infection. So basically, that was the first ever Borrelia that was identified as
So, Andres, let me ask you a question before we move forward with that piece of it. Let's define Lyme disease. The name of your company is Lyme Diagnostics, and one of the things that we discuss here at Think Boot Camp is that there are many definitions of Lyme disease. In fact, there seem to be as many definitions of Lyme disease as there are people who are studying it or building business models around it, or whose lives are being impacted by it. So, why don't we first begin by defining Lyme disease? How do you at Lyme Diagnostics define Lyme disease?
well, we have. I mean, it started as a joke because My brother, who is a doctor, they have like a special expression for things that they don't know and they don't understand, and they call it the IDK syndrome, which is I don't know. So whenever the doctors face the challenge, of an IDK syndrome, that can be defined, and that's the best definition of Lyme disease to our understanding. And of course, my father has, because I don't know if you heard about it or you read about it, but it was my father who gave the actual name, the scientific name of the disease, which is Lyme borreliosis. It was his recommendation at the second International Congress of Lyme disease. So, and later on it was accepted, and now people use it in the scientific world. So, and just to give you like a background, that in the Jewish um, world, whenever you give name to something, like Adam gave name to the animals, then you have power over them. So it seems like the fact that he gave the name gave him also power over the disease, because he was actually the one who named the disease, and he was the first one to discover a very good um, diagnostic method that could be validated in the lab, and he was the first one to use a combined treatment. Now, more than 25 years have passed since his work was finished, and right now we are reading more and more about specific combination therapies, but it was his first uh, invention, and then now he refers to Lyme and co-infections as morbus exoticus, which is the
Morbus exoticus?
yes, which means Exodus is the tick and morbus is the disease. So tick disease, because we just cannot separate Lyme disease from the other bugs that the same tick can actually give to you or spread to you. And the issue is that once you get Lyme disease, then all the other bugs feel like, I'm free. I can now go and infect the body, so they actually come stronger, and then they cause a problem in your whole body, and then you wipe out Lyme disease, but you don't think about the co-infections. So it was already in 2007 that he already went into diagnosing the co-infections with the same microscopy method uh, as he invented for Borrelia, a little bit modified. So the same idea that we concentrate the bugs, we concentrate the infected blood cells, and then we investigate that under the microscope. So
Okay, so we're gonna
basically, we
so
define now tick disease rather than Lyme disease, which is, I think it's like a more correct way of saying what people feel.
well, that's good. So you and your dad are men after our hearts because we agree with you that Lyme disease is not just borreliosis, but it is a polymicrobial multisystemic chronic infectious or post-infectious disease. That's how we define Lyme disease here at Think Boot Camp. So give me your reaction to our definition: polymicrobial multisystemic chronic infectious or post-infectious disease.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that. Actually, yeah, the chronic thing. This is what I would like to stress even more, because my father said, he has always said that this is a chronic disease from the beginning. So it's useless to debate whether there is chronic Lyme disease or not chronic Lyme disease. And we actually have a more political way of saying the definition, because we know that there is a debate between people who say there is chronic Lyme disease, and then people invented PTLDS, which is kind of a crappy definition for what
We
is
agree.
happening to people after the treatment. So the point is that we have a definition like, Lyme disease with chronic symptoms, that can be said without making a statement whether you support the PTLDS people or the chronic Lyme people. But we agree that it's a chronic infection that covers the whole body, and now there is ample evidence that the bug can enter your bloodstream after 4 to 6 hours of the bite, or even earlier. But after 4 to 6 hours, it gets a direct connection to your blood system. So you can talk about local infection as well, but I don't believe in early localized infection, because that is just going to make you, unaware of the symptoms that might be caused by a systemic infection. So it has been shown that every organ is infected by, let's say, the latest 10 or 14 days after the infection. So if you don't do anything, you're going to have very, very chronic symptoms and a very disseminated disease. And we can say that we have evidence, and now we have collected a few publications, including Eva Shapi's publication, that you can always find these bugs in the blood of patients who are ill. The point is that they might hide away in certain organs, but they always fill back, and they always leak back into the blood. Why? They should not hide. There is nothing that they can be harmed with. Blood, the immune reaction is not going to kill all of them, because they change the surface antigens so frequently. They come with new generations after 3-4 weeks that cannot be influenced by the immune reaction. They are much faster than the white blood cells that could eat them. So, what's the problem for them to be in blood when they are protected? So they stop the immune reaction, they try to modulate the immune reaction. So whenever you're attacking them, you're actually attacking your own body instead of them. That's all. So a lot of autoimmune diseases are actually the sign of Lyme disease, we understand.
Okay. So we are in agreement that Lyme disease is polymicrobial. There'll be many bugs that are spit into a person when they're suffering a tick bite. We agree that it's multisystemic, meaning it's going to go through your entire body. We agree that it's only a chronic disease. It is not an acute disease. And we agree that it is an infectious disease. Let me ask you about the last piece of our definition, so that we can move on to problems. And Matt's going to join us, problems with diagnostic testing. What is your position on post-infectious disease? Meaning that even after treatment, and even after successful killing of the bugs, that there are many people that still remain sick.
Well, if you can tell me anyone except Eva Shapi who has been able to directly identify the bugs from the blood or from any organ of a living person, then I would believe that there is a post-infectious syndrome. Until then, I have to say that in most of the cases, what we see is that the treatment that was administered has not been effective. And that means that the symptoms that they consider post-infectious disease are mostly coming from the still existing Borrelia in the body or the existing co-infections. We have almost no exception to this rule, okay? Because we are probably the only one who can routinely identify these bugs in the blood. So we can say that we have not seen a patient who was suffering from the symptoms of Lyme disease or co-infections, and we haven't found the bugs in the blood. Okay. There are very, very, very few exceptions where the Lyme disease has already been eradicated. Let's say someone had an operation or something, but for example, the co-infections remained or they were acquired during the operation because of the blood transfusion that they received or something like that. And, it's the same thing. It can be even worse. So it can be even more difficult to treat once you have your immune system is down. So PTRDS for me, forgive the saying it's bullshit. For
All
me,
right. No,
there is
we
no
love blunt talk here. Bullshit is one of our favorite terms. So, so you believe, just so we can, we can round up this part of our conversation. So you believe that, anytime someone is sick from Lyme disease, they have they have an active infection, and the reason folks like us may believe that an appropriate element of a Lyme disease diagnosis, I mean, sorry, Lyme disease definition, is that it could be post-infectious, is because there really isn't adequate testing to determine whether or not there are bugs in the blood. And you believe 100% of the time that the bugs are in the blood, some type of bug, whether it be Borrelia or something that you're defining now as a co-infection, but there's always something in the blood. And just because we most of the testing, other than yours, doesn't have the capacity to identify those bugs, that's why they believe it's post-infectious. But you believe it is not post-infectious. It's 100% of the time it's infectious.
I've not seen, as I said, I've not seen anyone who tried to identify the bugs, the remaining bugs with a proper method, except Eva Shapi, who is building on the work of Alan MacDonald, and I actually tried to, um, okay, there is also another Eva Ružić, who is in Slovenia. She is also doing some cultivation, but Eva Shapi is the one who has done it systematically and saying that we can cultivate the Borrelia from an already treated patient and we can identify it with PCR. Whatever people say, that's the truth that we see every day.
All right. Well, you just mentioned two of our favorite people, Dr. Alan
Huh.
MacDonald, who we've interviewed many times on this podcast. We actually consider him one of our mentors. He's been wonderful to us, and he was just a brilliant interview, and quite frankly, one of the most popular guests from the standpoint of downloads. And then Dr. Shapi, who is also just a wonderful, brilliant human being, who is another one of the folks that that our community loves to listen to, and they love to consume her material. So
Yeah,
you're
well,
standing
Alan
on
is a friend of my father's as well.
you're standing on the shoulders of two of the giants in this community, McDonald and Shapi. They're two brilliant doctors and researchers. So let's um let's now talk about different testing methods, just so that we have a whole spectrum of people that listen to this podcast. We have some people who are newly diagnosed. We have some people who are not yet diagnosed, but they have family members who are ill, but people are seeking diagnosis. And we have people who have been chronically ill in some cases for decades. So we have a whole spectrum of folks that regularly follow our podcast. So we want to make sure that we're making information available to everyone, regardless of where they are. So let's talk about testing, because it's one of the most controversial elements of Lyme disease. Getting diagnosed is very, very difficult, and getting an objective diagnosis is very difficult, which is why there's so much gaslighting in this community, where if a doctor doesn't have a test that says, that checks off the box that says you have a diagnosis, doctors are hesitant to give you a clinical diagnosis. And once they're hesitant to give you a clinical diagnosis, then they essentially tell you that you're not really sick, that it's in your head, right? So one of the most difficult elements of a Lyme disease journey is getting diagnosed and having a good test. So most of our listeners are familiar with the two-tier test. It's two tiers of bad results, but it is still a two-tier test where we have the ELISA. Uh, and so why don't you talk to us about first the traditional testing, the two-tier testing, and then distinguish what your test is from the traditional two-tier test.
Well, whenever I hear the two-tier test, this famous word, then I have to laugh, because we did the largest clinical trial in Europe, including 400 patients or subjects from 6 countries, 8 clinics, 8 Lyme clinics, and we found that the second tier is actually better in every aspect than if you add the first tier. So ELISA, whatever they do right now, makes the two-tier test less sensitive than Western blot alone. This is what we have found. So basically, the sensitivity of the two-tier test is 39%, and based on a random sample of patients from Lyme clinics, we didn't define what kind of people were included. The doctors just had to say, the patient has Lyme disease. So they could actually enroll the patient by saying, the patient has Lyme disease and I'm going to treat him or her. That was the only enrollment criteria that we needed for the positive arm inclusion. So we found out that the two-tier test has a 39% sensitivity, whereas the Western blot alone has a 43% sensitivity, whereas both of them have 100% specificity. So there is no point. There is
Sorry,
no point in adding the first tier to the second tier.
quick
Okay,
question to build on that, Rich. Just one point of clarity, because my understanding with the two-tier testing, it's in the ELISA and the Western blot. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, so you're saying the two-tier testing is 39% sensitivity. So what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that 39% of patients that have Lyme disease get a positive outcome? Is that what that means? Can you describe what that? Okay.
Yeah, that's
And
the point. That's
okay.
the point. And we were able to test the two-tier test alone and each of them separately. So the first tier and the second tier test separately. So basically the highest value, if we are talking about serology test, is a very well adapted Western blot, makes a better guess. It's still not very accurate, I must say, but at least if you add the first tier, which is the ELISA, then you get a worse result in every aspect. So you're not increasing the specificity, but you are decreasing the sensitivity. So you're not getting more people diagnosed with that, and you are not actually improving the false positive results. Okay, because there are none.
Right. So people would go and get the ELISA screening test, and if it didn't show positive, they wouldn't get the Western blot, which was the worst thing to do back in the day. And I think many doctors here in the States, specifically New York, are doing either just the Western blot or the two-tier testing, which is better, but still not great, which are looking at maybe, low 40s as far as a percentage of being able to properly identify an active Lyme infection. Is that right? No?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So we
Isn't it worse?
Western blot is enough if you want to test for the immune reactions of the patient.
So is the two-tier worse than just the Western blot alone? Is that what I understood?
Yeah. exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. The Western blot we used, both of them, there was one which was actually improved by my father, and there was the original Microgen. So it's a German company producing this test. The original one was better without the ELISA, so the first tier test.
So of course, now this is not a direct detection test. So let's talk about
No, not
the
at all.
two-tier test, which seems to be bringing 2 tiers down your face when you take it, as opposed to anything else. But what so can you talk to us or help our audience understand the difference between direct detection and indirect detection, and why the indirect detection is not as effective as a direct detection test?
Yeah, well, first of all, if you let me give you an example. You're going hunting, and you can see that something is hiding behind the bush. You can see the footsteps of a deer leading to the bush, and now you're gonna shoot. Are you gonna shoot? Are you gonna shoot at the bush, knowing that there is the footsteps leading to it? Are you going to shoot at the bush, not knowing what's behind, only seeing the footsteps? Are you going to shoot there?
Well, hopefully you're not going to be behind the bush, because
Well,
if there are deer
if
tracks coming up to that and you're behind it, I'm going to be shooting your butt.
if it's a dog behind the bush, then you can also because it may be that there was a deer behind the bush, but now it's a dog. So are you going to kill a dog because you have seen the footsteps of a deer? And that's the whole point. You can only see the footsteps of the Borrelia in many cases. Okay, but the biggest problem with serological testing is that this bug, there have been several publications about that, they can actually inactivate all the different types of immune reactions. Okay, so there are 4 kinds of reactions that your body uses to get rid of the bugs that live in your blood, and they inactivate all 4 of them. So what can you expect? It is pure luck that, we are kind of estimating that in 30% of the cases, the specific immune reaction, which means that your body is creating antibodies against the bug, is blocked. It's completely blocked. So you cannot measure it. There is no antibodies. And in about the remaining 70%, you have to make a guess where to set your limits, where you're going to have a positive test or a negative test. The point is that the maximum you can reach in sensitivity is 70%, okay, with a serological test. And most of the tests are defined in a way that they maximize the specificity, which means that they will have 100% specificity, so no false positive reactions. But this means if you have ever seen the design of a clinical test, it means that you are actually scrapping half of the true positive patients. So it's deliberately designed that way. There is no way that someone could have made such a mistake without knowing it. So it's deliberately designed to maximize specificity at 100%. And they had to know that this means that they are actually sacking half of the actual positive patients who will get a negative result despite showing some reaction. And my father has discovered that because he did like 110,000 different serological tests in the laboratory and in some other laboratories. And he basically could make the demonstration and could redefine how to read the serological test. So we have what is called the Bozsik Western blot, which is an improved version of the Western blot, which has a 50% higher sensitivity than the original test. Of course, we had to sacrifice some of the specificity. So it's not 100% anymore, but it's 94%, which is, like a fairly good result, considering that the sensitivity is greatly improved.
When you say a serology test, is that basically looking for an immune response or an indirect detection of the illness, not necessarily a direct detection like a microscopy approach? Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. We are still talking about indirect test, which is measuring the immune reaction against Borrelia in this case.
And it's well known out there in the laboratory world and the doctor world that these serology tests that are looking for immune response in an indirect way are not perfect, and that they're going to intentionally scrape out people that are sick because of how they have to master the algorithm to determine if it's positive or not. So they're focused more on not getting false positives than they are on false negatives. Is that an accurate statement as well?
Exactly.
And yet most doctors, when you speak to them, are adamant that if you are not positive on an indirect test, right, like the Western blot or the two-tier test, that they're saying you don't have Lyme disease, and they're very confident. And that's really not the case based on what you just outlined.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we should know when we receive this kind of results, we should know how the tests were designed.
So, and Maddie's arguing that it was intentional, right? That it was intentionally designed that way.
You cannot have such a design by like failure of the system. It's not that. It's intentionally designed in that way. I understand. I completely understand. However, the best way, I think, to design tests, if you want to identify patients who are sick, then you go for the positive predictive value, which is, what percentage of the sick people are you going to find? And if you want to have an exclusion test, like with COVID, you wanted to completely be sure that if a patient gets a negative result, then they are healthy. Okay. You're not sure about the positive results, but you want to be sure that whenever there is a negative test, then the patient is healthy. Then you must focus on the negative predictive value, which is basically you want to find all the people who are healthy. Okay, but in the case of Lyme disease, they didn't use this type of design, but they actually focused on sensitivity and specificity, which is a statistical measure. It's basically what percentage of the people who are positive are you going to get right, and what percentage of the people who are negative are you going to get right. So if the patient is negative and you find all the patients who are negative, then you have 100% specificity. If patients are positive and you find all of them, then you have 100% sensitivity. Okay, and both cannot be achieved at 100%. There is no way. And by the design of the test, you decide which way you go. And we decided that we focus on the opinion of the doctor, the previous expectation of the doctor, and we want to match that, which is a more exact value in terms of when you are actually dealing with patients than if you focus on sensitivity or specificity.
So can we, Matt, why don't we build out the deer metaphor a little bit more, because I think it will help everybody to understand some of the challenges of testing. So I really like that example, right? So the argument that you made is that indirect testing or antibody testing is very much like your example when you go hunting and you see something moving behind a bush, and as you're coming up to the bush, you see paw prints in the ground, and the question is there a deer behind it or is there not a deer behind it? It could be a dog, it could be a person, it could be nothing. Now let's explore the indirect testing in two different ways, right? So the first thing that you shared with us is that because because the bugs have a particular set of tools and principles, that in many cases it can shut down the immune response. And because it's shutting down the immune response, if you're looking for the paw prints, but the paw prints are not available because there was ice over the ground
Exactly.
before the deer left, then you would not see any paw prints, even though there was a deer behind it, right? So that's one challenge that we have with indirect testing. But there's another challenge with indirect testing. I'd like you to explore this with us, which is there are many different types of bugs. We're going to have bacteria, we're going to have viruses, we're going to have protozoa, we're going to have a number of different types of bugs, and there are going to be different strains of the bugs. For example, Borrelia, which is what we've been talking about for most of our conversation. There are many different strains of bugs, and they're going to have different types of footprints based on the different type of bug that we have here, right? So the other challenge that we have with indirect testing, assuming there are footprints that are available because the immune response is not shut down, is that the tests are only going to be looking for certain types of footprints. So if it sees, like a three toe print, they will not deem that to be Lyme disease, even though it may be a different strain of Lyme disease. So build out that example for us a little bit more to show other flaws associated with indirect testing, and please correct any of the examples that I was giving.
No, I think you actually made a perfect rollout of the example that I gave. It was even more than what we usually do, you know. So we don't roll it out so much. Yes, but then in many cases you don't even see footprints, you know, or you see footprints of a dog, or you see footprints that are like um, not readable anymore. So that would be like the ELISA, which measures the total immune response, which means that maybe one of the antigens is going to produce a higher immune response, like P41, which, according to our analysis, P41 is not very specific to Borrelia. So although in many cases this is the only sign that you will have of a chronic patient, okay? But still, it is not specific, so you may have a blurred footprint, and you are going to guess whether to shoot or not, okay? And you are going to guess with which type of bullets you are going to shoot, because maybe it's just a small deer, you know, where you have to use a different type of ammunition uh, to hit that. Whereas if you use a very big one, you know, it might get cross, you know, through the deer, and then it will hit someone in the background. So basically, you have to be careful what you use, and yeah, you can measure the diameter of the footprint and the specificity of the footprint. You're allowed to do that, and we can do that with serology, but we will not know whether it's the same deer that left the footprint that is behind the bush. So it may be a different deer already. So your immune system is reacting to something that was there before, but it's not there anymore. Instead, there is something else which should be treated with a different ammunition, a different bullet.
Which I mean, which sort of builds out another piece of this example, right? Because one of the things that you had shared, and we know from Dr. Shapi, that there is a lot of shape shifting that takes place, and different proteins are exchanged, and the composition of the bug changes, which is why it's so difficult for the immune system to ultimately kill it. And maybe the footprints that we see going back there, they put some gloves on their feet, and now they're walking in. It's now a different type of
Exactly.
footprint. So now we have a
Exactly.
different way of, we think we're looking at a deer, but because there were gloves put on the deer's feet, now it looks like like a human hand or something. I mean, again, I know I'm torturing this example, but
No, it's a very good one. So believe me, yeah, a large laboratory asked us to give a review of all the relevant publications that were done since 2019. So I did that experiment. I counted 3,700 publications that contain the word Lyme. And I read at least the summary of every one of them.
wow.
And I found a lot of evidence that is already present regarding the gene variation, the genetic variation of Borrelia. And now we know that they not only change the expression of the genes, but they actually fully change the gene setup. For example, let me give you one striking publication where they were actually doing a model infection. So it was not like a real person, but it was a mouse, I think, that they infected, and they were looking for the same genetic trait that the infection was done with, and they were looking for different genetic variations of the same locus. And they found that up to 3 weeks of the infection, they could find the original genome, whereas after 3 weeks, the next 3 weeks, they could find a different one. And I think after 9 weeks, they completely lost track of the genome, which means that it's actually there. It's coming in new generations. The new generations, I mean, this is it changes your mind, because there are some German researchers who did some modeling based on the experimental infections, and they found out that the only way that you can have this kind of waving infection that you can identify in the case of Borrelia. So there is a waving of the level of Borrelia all the time. Every 2-3 weeks, there is a change. The only way that you can have this is that there is an initial infection, comes up, there is immune reaction, infection goes down, and there is a new generation of the same Borrelia, but genetically different, that cause a new wave of infection. And this explains why you're going to have IgM reaction in a chronic patient. The reason is because every 3 weeks, there is a genetic variation, there is a change of surface antigens, and therefore your immune system finds it a new and different infection from the previous one. So it is not true that anything after 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever they say, anything in the IgM, so the early type of reaction, is a false reaction. No, this is a new reaction to a new genetic trait of the same bacteria. Okay, this is now fact. This has been supported, and I actually put this down in one of our publications, because I found it so exciting that now we can tell, and we can make the story understandable.
So talk to us a little bit more about DualDur and what you guys are doing to improve Lyme diagnostics and how you're using this direct model to identify the pathogen. Because it seems like to me, you talked earlier about how your father, when Lyme was first discovered, knew that syphilis, which is very similar to Lyme, another spirochete, was being tested using a direct detection model. But then with Lyme, we went to the indirect approach. And it sounds like one of the reasonings behind that was that Lyme is found in very low concentrations in your blood, and therefore the direct approach might not be ideal because it might not be in that sample of blood being tested, right? So how
Yes.
did you overcome that with your test to make a better test than the indirect testing that's been the mainstream for the last 50 years?
Yeah, the point is, coming back to the example, now, we have checked that there are footsteps leading to the bush, but now we have binoculars, and we can check what's behind the bush because we can see behind. There are not so many leaves that we couldn't see. So we can actually check. So that was the objective, to go and see what's there directly. Okay. So we say, we have a binocular, we have a pair of binoculars, and we can identify what's behind. So that was the objective, not to rely on the footsteps only, but to complement it with a direct approach. So I must say that it is very unfortunate that sometimes in the 1970s or 1980s, people started writing about Lyme disease and recurrent fever. And there was a textbook that explicitly mentions that recurrent fever can be diagnosed with a microscope, but Lyme disease cannot. Recurrent fever was the first disease that was identified as being caused by bacteria. Okay, because they could take a blood sample, they could see the bacteria in the blood while the patient had like 40, 42 degrees Celsius fever, and very, very feeling very, very bad. Now we know that Lyme disease is not so bad. We know, and we have seen from publications, that recurrent fever comes with at least 2 orders of magnitude more bacteria than Lyme disease. So at least 100 times, maybe 1,000 times more. So, and this was a textbook that said, okay, we can measure recurrent fever, we cannot measure Lyme disease. Okay. And this is what actually defined science up to, let's say, 10 years ago. Because still now, doctors say, but you cannot find Borrelia in the blood because they hide away. Now, as I explained, they have no reason to hide away. They are not being attacked by the immune system. They are not being eaten by the white blood cells. They feel very well in the blood because there is plenty of food for them. Okay, so they don't need to hide away. The only thing they don't like is actually the oxygen that is in high concentrations in the red blood cells. However, they got help from Babesia and Bartonella, which are actually helping to reduce the oxygen content of the blood. So they are very, very friendly to each other, and they help each other because they reduce the blood flow, they reduce the oxygen content. So, basically your body is going to starve for oxygen. So the point is that if you are being misled by textbooks, then you are not going to invent anything. But if you say, okay, we know that recurrent fever comes in a high concentration. We know that there is a high concentration of, the spirochetes from syphilis, okay, treponema, they are called, and we can test it directly. But we know that there is a low concentration of Borrelia burgdorferi in the blood because that's how it was identified by Willy Burgdorfer. The first thing he did, he looked for it. That's a different reason why, how he knew what to look for, okay? But the point is that he knew to look for this in the blood, and he found it and he identified it. It was not serology, it was not PCR, it was pure microscopy in the beginning. So he identified these bugs, and we know that they are there in actually almost every body fluid that we examine, except maybe urine, where only the genetic material is there. But is there in semen? Is there in almost every secretion that we want to find? Nevertheless, we must test for blood, because you can have a lot of spirochetes on the surface of your skin or in any, hiding away in any part of your body. But what is causing a disease is the systemic infection. So once you have a lot of Borrelia in the blood, that means, and we have proven it by statistics in our clinical trial, that means actually you have Lyme disease. So, and it's not enough to have just a few, but you have to have a certain level so that they actually start causing symptoms. So the idea was how to see the scarce bacteria in the blood. First of all, that means you have to take like 4 milliliters of blood, and you have to concentrate the bugs from that blood. So it's not good to prick your hand, your finger, and then put a drop of blood on the microscope. That will lead you nowhere. Okay, so the first idea is to concentrate them. Second, it is very well known, and my father knew it, that there are certain artifacts that are created when you examine blood. So the moment you take the blood out of the original container, which is the man, the person, then it starts to deteriorate. And that is going to actually form different forms that are very similar to Borrelia. So as long as you are just looking at the blood itself, then you are going to see a lot of false objects, as there was unfortunately a Norwegian professor who actually published that. You can identify the artifacts that they are calling Borrelia. They are in fact not Borrelia. Borrelia don't appear after a certain time. Artifacts do. Borrelia are there, and you can examine them and identify their special motion when you look at them. So the problem was how to get rid of artifacts. And because artifacts are mainly caused by human part of the blood, therefore my father found specific agents that will actually harden the membranes of the human elements. So they will not be able to move, they will not be able to form artifacts. So whatever you see moving under the microscope is going to be some bug that is not of human origin. And that was basically the second problem that he had to overcome. And then, of course, we have some stability issues. How much how much food you are going to give to the Borrelia, so they don't overgrow, but they actually keep stay alive. So all of that is now in a certain liquid that we call DualDur. It means, because it's hard. Dur means hard in Latin. So it's double hard because the membranes have been hardened by two agents, actually. This means we concentrate and we look at what is moving and what is not an artifact. So without that specific treatment of the blood, you would not be able to identify the Borrelia. And of course, you need to feed them. So we have special foodstuff that is only used by Borrelia and not by mainly other bacteria, or not by the human blood. So basically, that's a very specific liquid that we are using, and the specific concentration method where we are taking out the infection. And then in one drop, we have more than 100 times concentration of the bacteria that are actually in the blood.
Hmm.
So the method is super sensitive, and we had to find the level at which we can actually say that below this level the patient is negative, and above the level, and that level, the patient is positive. So we had to find a correlation with the clinical status of the patient. Because if you are looking for the genome of the Borrelia or the co-infections, you're going to find them. You're going to find, even with a patient who has been treated, because most of the methods of PCR, they can identify 1 to 5 pieces of the genome in 1 milliliter of blood. So the sensitivity or the level of detection is very, very, very low. But finding the genome, it's not the same. Like, coming back to our deer example, finding a dead deer behind the bush is not going to make you happy, or finding the bones of a deer is not going to make you happy. You don't want to shoot on that, because that's not going to be a trophy, because someone has already taken the trophy out of that. So just finding bones, that's the genome of the Borrelia, does not mean that actually the deer is there. So basically, and it's not enough to find one bone, but you have to find all of the bones, let's say, or many, many bones of the deer, in order to be able to prove. And we can say that we don't shoot at one deer, we shoot at least on, let's say, 5 deer, because we want to let some of them live. Okay, but the point is that it's not enough to find one, you have to find more. And this is where the clinical trial comes in, which helped us, the previous examinations helped us to define the proper cutoff level between the positive and negative values. And this is why we can have a direct test that also is not only showing the level of infection, but also tells you a diagnosis, a laboratory diagnosis that is either positive or negative, which correlates very well with the patient's status.
When you speak about the level of infection, can this test be used to identify how well a treatment protocol is going? So, for example, you're super positive, but now you're regular positive, right? For simple terms. And is this a tool that can be used from a diagnostic standpoint by Lyme literate practitioners to say, hey, how is my treatment really doing for this patient?
Yeah, well, we don't supply that information in the test report, but doctors and some patients often ask us, and then we can tell them, okay, now you're good, you're going in the right direction. It's not a problem that previously it was clear positive and now it's borderline positive, but you are going into the right direction. And then, in some cases we saw absolutely no change. And then we asked the doctor, okay, why did you test again? And then, we get all the different answers, okay? But we do see that some doctors are able to get from a very positive level to a very, very low level of Borrelia that is actually almost nothing in the blood. As I say, we have a super sensitive method because we are concentrating more than 100 times of the bacteria in the blood. So just having 1 or 2 pieces in a test, it doesn't actually say that you have a Borrelia problem.
Got it. Now, talk to us about the tech behind this, right? Because in reading up on you in preparation for this interview, I learned that you're using an artificial intelligence-based system to do this testing, and you kind of automated this, right? So what kind of tech has gone into this? And you touched on this earlier when you said that you brought certain tech to the company that did not exist when your dad first started doing this testing many years ago. So can you speak to how technological advancements have helped you perfect this test for Lyme patients?
Yeah, basically, of course, we like natural intelligence, so we never give the whole decision to an artificial intelligence. So I must reassure you that it's not like, AI crap that is coming out of the system. Sometimes I just heard that the AI, Google medical AI just invented a new part of the brain, because and no one actually realized it, and they submitted the publication with that. So nothing like that can happen to us, okay? So what we now call explainable AI, I don't know if you have heard this expression.
No.
I wanted to have that. I didn't know that expression in 2018 when we started with the AI technology. But I told my colleague, okay, I want to understand why the AI wants to make that decision. And if it's not logical, then I'm going to overrule that because and right now we are further developing, and now we can say that we have 100% explainable AI. In the previous version that we were using, and we are still using actually, we had some parts of the decision that had to be left to the AI, completely. But that was still, by knowing that by limiting the range where we are actually giving the decision over. But right now we are aiming at 100% explainable AI, and we have achieved that with our current system. So that means we know if the AI is deciding for a positive or negative result, we know it's because the bacteria, the number of bacteria, or the multiplication activity of the bacteria that we can actually identify in the system, they are such that we can see that either there are a lot of bacteria or they are multiplying heavily, that we can identify as a positive reaction, and all the rest with little bacteria and not multiplying, they can be identified as a negative reaction. So that's the basic idea that we had. Okay, but let me go from because we have several layers of the technology. And the first thing that I invented in the 1990s was a modified microscope. But back then, we were not able to use the technology because we didn't have a proper light source to do that. And now with LEDs and with lasers, we do have the proper light source that can deliver the required type of light. So when in 1995, I think I talked to my professors. They said, okay, well, theoretically this could happen. And most of the microscopy professionals, they said that, this is wrong direction. Don't go there because it's not going to work. So, we waited like 20 years. And after those 20 years, we had the technology ready, and we could identify that we can actually improve the spatial resolution of the microscope, and we can greatly improve the sharpness of the picture. that the microscope is showing. And these two things are very important when you are using AI, that you have completely sharp and accurate forms, okay? So like the sharpness is way better than it used to be with my father's old microscope. Even I upgraded that later on. But the point is, if you don't have sharp enough pictures, then you're gonna need a lot more information, like 4 megapixels instead of 1 megapixel. And 4 megapixels of a video would not have been possible with the technology that was there, you know, back in the early 2020s, that we could actually use the technology. So we would have needed a supercomputer to run that past the AI and the recognition system. So basically, it was crucial that we get the lowest possible resolution, I mean the megapixels down, so we have simple information for the AI and the recognition software to digest. And therefore, the software was of course prepared, or the core of the software was prepared by a very good friend of mine who is picture recognition expert and also an AI expert. So he was able to write a software that can identify the Borrelia and teach a system to identify them as a moving, small, thin object that is moving in a special way. And then, of course, there is a human approval for this, and there is a diagnostic decision which is made, let's say, 80% by explainable AI, which means that we know why the decision has been made, like positive or negative. And I can tell you that even when we rely on the AI, and it's unclear in the beginning, we can say that yes, the decision was good. So then we get feedback from the patient. Okay, let's say the patient had a bit lower Borrelia level, but they had a lot of multiplication going on. And in those cases, the AI has a better decision than the human would make. So based on pure statistics, we're calculating something like 30 plus different qualities of the Borrelia in order to make a decision. So it's way better than someone who is running with a microscope and trying to examine and count the Borrelia. That's way better.
Yeah, but let's talk about that, because you said something earlier that I wanted to highlight to make sure we explain for everybody listening. So we talked about serology and we talked about antibody tests, which is looking for an immune response in certain antibodies, not actually directly the pathogen itself. But then you talked about PCR versus microscopy. And both of those are direct detection models, except PCR is really looking for trace, I think, genetic materials of the bacteria versus actually seeing the bacteria under a microscope in a live form. Is that correct? And if not, please correct me, tell me how I'm wrong and what the difference between PCR and microscopy is, so, we can better understand those terms.
Yeah, I think that this explanation is quite correct. Okay. What I can add, maybe it will be too scientific for the people to understand, but in microscopy, we can easily count the concentration of Borrelia. We can tell the exact number. Okay, we can even calculate it. What the number would be if we calculate it for the original blood sample. So we can actually calculate for the how many pieces of Borrelia in the blood type of thing. Whereas with PCR, most of them actually have a positive result when there is a small amount of DNA already available. But if you want to calculate the number of the DNA sequences that you are looking for, you're going to have a problem, because you can always go in steps of double. So PCR is about cycling, and in each cycle, you double the amount of DNA. So you can either have, let's say, 2,000 or 4,000. There's nothing in between. So you can either have a count of 2,000 Borrelia DNA or 4,000, not more or not less. Okay. You cannot have 2,500. You cannot, basically, it would be very, very hard to have a quantitative PCR that measures that little difference. And it turns out that in Borrelia diagnosis, it is important. So you can confirm the presence of the DNA, but you cannot say whether this is a level that means the patient has symptoms or the patient doesn't have symptoms.
Yeah, I want to
Okay.
learn more about, you talked earlier about how basically every bodily fluid has Borrelia in it when you're infected, and urine is sort of quasi half the exception to that. There's often debate about whether Lyme disease can be sexually transmitted, or even if somebody's just, sharing a drink or kissing their significant other. And there's certainly not consensus in the medical community about that. But based on all of your work and your research, and really, frankly, the leading edge side of the Lyme arena you're in, what are your views towards the sexual transmission of Lyme, and also the risks of infecting your partner through various means?
Well, that's a very good question that probably no one knows the answer to. Okay, from our perspective, we have seen that they have been able to identify the Borrelia from semen, from vaginal secretions. They have even been able to transmit the disease from the male mouse to a female mouse. Okay, so that has happened. However, you mustn't forget that mice in the laboratory, they may have a very, very narrow genetic trait. So it does not always mean that this would happen to a healthy mouse, like a wild mouse, like a healthy person. So we have been able to demonstrate that, yes, it is there. But, this is the same reason why mosquitoes are less likely to transmit Lyme disease. Why? Because ticks are very good vector. Why? Because they actually reduce the immune reaction, because they want to draw your blood for a long time. Therefore, they have to go against the immune response, which means that in the long time, while they are actually they are feeding on you, they are going to have multiplication of the bacteria, and they can easily go back to the body and get it infected, because your immune system is reduced. And the point is that you have to have a large enough number of bacteria to be able to infect. So the more bacteria, and the more the immune system is damaged, the more likely you are able to infect. So let's say there is a sexual intercourse, the semen contains some Borrelia. There is no way that it will get into the blood of the female person. Why? Because there are not so many scratches, like that would, and where a meaningful amount of bacteria would enter. So, and there is usually no immune depression unless the patient has already some disease. So like HIV and, not normal sexual intercourses. That would be a means where I can imagine that there is some transmission, but with a normal immunocompetent persons, I would be much more afraid of the mother infecting the baby, which has been shown, or the tick biting you and staying there for more than 4 to 6 hours. That would be a more ideal way to spread the disease.
So it seems like you and your father have been ahead of the Lyme game for the last several decades. And it's proving to be true based on all the studies and the findings you're now coming to with the help of tech. But one of the things you touched on earlier was your father quickly recognized that combination therapy would be needed to treat Lyme disease. And here we are several decades later. What is your view towards treating chronic Lyme disease, building upon your dad's work? And, how do you think people listening to this podcast who are suffering with their health can bring information to their doctor based on some recommendations from you and your experience that might help them get through this and feel a little bit better from this horrible disease?
Yeah, well, it's a very, very long topic. So I must say that my father tried cultivating the bacteria, and he tried different types of antibiotics on the bacteria. And there is also input from other researchers that we know the following. First of all, when trying to use a single antibiotic, even the concentration that is required in the lab to kill the bacteria in the lab, in the Petri dish, it cannot be achieved in a living human. So, well, we often say that the best way to treat Lyme disease is to kill the patient. That has been tried by many people, like infecting with malaria and stuff like that. So it's very easy to get to that point when you're actually harming the patient. So the point is that a single antibiotic will never get you the concentration that will kill the bacteria in a living person. And he has measured that, and that's point number one. Point number two is that different strains of Borrelia have different sensitivities to antibiotics. Whereas the one that is causing more arthritis and skin symptoms, which is very frequent in Europe, which is the Borrelia afzelii, they are going to be sensitive to the doxycycline type of antibiotics. Whereas the one that is causing more the neurological symptoms, which is Borrelia garinii, that is going to be sensitive more like to the penicillin type, or the let's say the derivatives or modern types, like amoxicillin and stuff. But none of them is going to be killed by a single antibiotic. So you need additional ones that are not only like combinations of these, because you can have 1,000 different combinations, but you must look for the ones that are going to be helping together. So this is they are effective alone, but together they are more effective. So this combination had to be found, and it's not only just like any combination, but it's a synergistic combination where one helps the other and the other helps the one. So that's the point. You have different mechanisms of action. So one of them is going to destroy the cell wall, the other one is going to stop the replication. The third one is going to stop the protein formation. So when you have a leak in the cell wall and the cell is not going to be able to repair itself, then you are going to have a killing. And some of the antibiotics are just bacteriostatic, meaning that they will not kill the already existing ones, but they are going to just stop the multiplication or reduce the multiplication. And the other types, they are often bactericid antibiotics that will actually kill the already existing bacteria. So that is a good combination that he found, that ciprofloxacin, which is an often forgotten drug, in combination with either doxycycline or amoxicillin, is going to work way better, like 100 times more effective than each of them alone. So the results of this I just presented at the Lyme European Conference of Islets. So there is plenty of evidence. My father has done the in vitro experiments, and he published that. And then they have done with the team of doctors. They have done the clinical experiment with 250 patients being followed up for at least 5 years. That's tremendous work, and the results are available, and the results show that there is a plus effect coming from the synergistic antibiotics. And what's more, it works in the real life. So we have plenty of evidence now that before we have symptoms and the patient is positive in our lab, and after we have no symptoms or very little symptoms and the patient is negative in our lab. So we can show the significant decrease of Borrelia compared to even some other treatments where we see, the patient is taking some herbals and still taking some herbals, but there is no change in the bacterial level of the patient. So that's what we actually encourage our doctor partners to look at their results and to change the therapies that they apply if they see that the certain patient is not improving.
So we know you did a research study that just ended a couple of years ago, and it was published in the EU on the European Union official government website. What are your plans now moving forward? Are you planning on expanding into the United States, and how are you planning on expanding and getting more attention to your company to help the countless millions of people that are suffering with chronic Lyme disease?
Well, when we finished that study, it was just the beginning of COVID. So we were going to present it, boom, 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 all the fireworks and everything, and all the publications and everything, and roll it out with one of the largest labs in the world, together. But it turned out that no one was paying attention to Lyme disease when they were actually hunting COVID. So we had to step change everything, and we had to come up with a new model, which meant that we set up our own laboratory and we started serving the patients and their doctors. So basically, that was a completely different method we had to take because of the actual needs. We didn't want to wait any longer. So and we wanted to serve the patients. By now, we have received samples from 33 different countries. So basically, as I mentioned, the sample and the example in the beginning, we had an Australian guy flying over, a Turkish guy flying over. So, a guy from Israel. We had a lot of patients. Some of them came from the United States to Spain, to one of our partners, to get their samples tested. Because we don't accept samples from the US currently. this is partly because of the legal situation, and partly because of the transport situation, that you have to customs clear every package, and it just takes too long for the sample to travel more than 1 week, and our stability is for 1 week. So basically, it's out of range. We are actually not so actively, but we are doing some negotiations with investors. So once they start, then we can give more marketing support and more support to our partners. And one of our objectives is actually to come to the US and do a joint study with one of the big research centers, and then get FDA approval and all the rest. But right now, I think let's stay on the ground. We want to conquer Europe. We want to make it available to as many people as possible. And then next step is maybe Costa Rica or something, close to the US, where we can actually do the testing, and then enter the US only when we have the clinical trials done for the US types. It can be very different. And then when we have the FDA approval, which I think is necessary, it's also for us because we don't want to promise anything that is not true. So we know that the disease is different in the US, so maybe there is a different cutoff level that we have to apply for the US patients. Maybe, I cannot imagine that it's completely out of touch, okay? That's for sure not, because we have the same bugs everywhere, but the understanding of the disease, maybe the diagnosis that the doctors made are different. So we have to, in order to comply with their opinion, we have to adjust our system. So we would not like to tell the doctors what they have to think, but we know what they think. We know that most of the doctors can identify Lyme disease based on the clinical symptoms, okay? And we want to give them a tool to measure and give them some support for their decision.
Well, this is really exciting. I can't thank you enough for not only joining with us, but giving us hope that not only are we going to have a direct detection test, but in the very near future, a very, very, I guess, highly refined and AI-driven direct detection test. So please continue to do the great work you're doing. Please do everything you can to try to get this up to the US as soon as possible. And also please stay in touch with us so we can continue to help our community have hope that there is going to be a test that will directly give them the information they need, not only about what bugs are causing them to be sick, but also how their treatment protocols are working.
And thank you very much for this opportunity, for finding us, for sharing the thoughts. And it seems that our thinking is very, very close to what you're thinking. So keep the good work up and help a lot of patients, which is also our mission. So I can't thank you enough for doing this information sharing, and keep it up. All the best.